Hello. In this video lecture, we're going to talk about rule of law. I'm going to explain what the rule of law is, and we're going to do so in terms of 5 principles of the rule of law. An important way to help us understand the concept of the rule of law is to contrast a government under rule of law with an arbitrary government. What is an arbitrary government? It's a government that does whatever it wants, whenever it wants, however it wants, totally unconstrained by law. It is a government by raw power. So we contrast an arbitrary government with a government that is under the rule of law. We do so in terms of 5 principles, which are laid out by Andrew Altman in his text arguing about law. The first principle is government under law. Government must operate under law. The idea here is that no one is above the law, no one is beyond the law. The president, for example, members of Congress, Supreme Court justices, whomever, must also obey the law just as every citizen must obey the law. But the government itself operates under control of the law. Principle 2 is that government operates by rules. Government must regulate society through a system of general and authoritative rules. By general, it means that these laws don't single out specific persons or specific groups. They are general in that sense. Another idea here is that there's no crime without a law. Something can't be illegal unless there's a law that says it is. Moreover, you can't punish someone unless they have committed a crime. So punishment itself is tied to the idea of general and authoritative rules or laws. Moreover, we have civil law as well, which governs things like contracts and wills, etc. The third principle is the principle of fair warning. The general and authoritative rules should give individuals fair warning. What does that mean? This tells us what the laws should look like. To give people fair warning, the laws should be made public. You can't have secret laws. People have to know what the laws are. The laws must be reasonably clear in meaning and specific in what they prohibit. They must be enforced for a reasonable period of time. People must know what the laws are, so they have to be enacted, and then people have time to which they can comply with the laws. Applied prospectively, which means you can't make something illegal and then punish people when they broke that law in the past. The law always applies to things that are done after the law is passed. They're implied impartially, that there's equal treatment under the law. The rich and powerful don't have a different set of laws for the regular folk. Possible to comply with. For example, you couldn't have a law that says you may not think bad thoughts, because that's impossible to comply with that law. And finally, to give people fair warning, the laws must be enacted in accordance with pre-existing legal rules. And we've talked a lot about this when we've talked about the constitutionality of laws. We lay down the Constitution, and that restricts what kind of laws we can make and how the laws are actually made. All of these things here give people fair warning so that they know what the laws are reasonable, that people can abide by these laws. Principle 4 is the principle of due process. And we've talked a lot about this when we've talked about the 5th Amendment and the 14th Amendment. The focus here is on what we call procedural due process. All persons must be given due process, that is, a fair chance to defend themselves against formal charges that they have violated the rules. For example, people would be given a fair trial. There are rules of evidence, there are rules of arrest, etc. And this would apply to everyone, the rich and poor as well as people in high levels of power. So the president, for example, if he or she were impeached, would get due process just as any citizen would get if they were accused of some other crime. Final principle, principle 5, is power of the people. This is an idea of democracy. The sovereign people, that means the people are ultimately in charge. The sovereign people ought to establish constitutional government and abide by its rules. The idea is that we agree to these rules to govern ourselves, and we establish a constitution so that we have written rules and guidelines for all future laws. So these are the 5 principles of the rule of law. We have government under law, government by rules. The rules give people fair warning. People have due process, and the power ultimately resides with the people. These principles distinguish a government under rule of law from an arbitrary government, a government of raw power. So accordingly, we have assignments for this week. In our talking points for this lesson, you're to explain, in your own words, why a government under rule of law is thought to be better than one that isn't. The textbook, if you have it, explains several ideas. I've also provided links that you can look at that will give you some ideas. And our discussion this week, thinking about the 5 principles of rule of law, which do you think are most important and why? So you should follow the guidelines on the discussion to write a good answer to this and post it, and then post at least 3 replies. They don't have to be replies to 3 different people, but there must be at least 3 replies by the end of the lesson week. So there we have it, and that's the end of this week's video lecture. Cheers.